The helicopter blades whirred overhead as we descended toward Antarctic Research Station Alpha 7, a cluster of interconnected buildings barely visible against the endless white landscape. I gripped my seat tighter as the pilot navigated through swirling snow, the facility growing larger through the frosted window. My stomach lurched when we touched down on the landing pad with a jolt that rattled my teeth. As the rotors slowed, I gathered my duffel bag and laptop case, pulled my hood tight around my face, and braced myself for the blast of cold air that hit me when the door slid open. The wind nearly knocked me off balance as I ducked and made my way across the pad toward a figure waiting at the entrance. "Bradley Evans?" A woman's voice cut through the noise of the dying engine. "I'm Allison Schultz, station coordinator." She didn't offer to shake hands, just nodded curtly and motioned for me to follow her inside. Allison was in her early 50s with silver-streaked auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her green eyes gave me a quick, assessing look before she turned and led me through the airlock. "Welcome to Alpha 7, she said once the outer door sealed behind us and we removed our outer gear. "You made good time, weather windows closing faster than predicted." The sudden warmth of the station made my cheeks tingle as we moved through a narrow corridor. I followed Allison, trying to take in my surroundings while keeping up with her brisk pace. "We'll start with the basics," she said, leading me down a hallway lined with pipes and conduits. Main hub connects all sections: living quarters East Wing, research facilities West Wing, communications and operations center North, maintenance and storage South. Allison pointed out rooms as we passed them: mess hall, medical bay, rec room, and various labs. The station was utilitarian but well maintained, with equipment that looked newer than I'd expected for such a remote outpost. Everything was labeled with color-coded signs and safety warnings. "Your quarters," she said, stopping at a door marked B7. She handed me a key card. "Bathrooms shared 2 doors down. Meals at 7, noon, and 6. Work assignments posted daily in the operations center." I nodded, setting my bags just inside the door of what would be my home for the next 6 months. The room was small but functional. Bed, desk, storage locker, and a small window, looking out at nothing but white. "One more thing," Allison said, reaching into her pocket. She pulled out a laminated card and handed it to me. "Station rules. Memorize them." I took the card, expecting standard safety protocols, but as I scanned the list, my eyebrows rose. These weren't typical research station guidelines. Rule 1. Never leave your quarters between 2 and 3 a.m. for any reason, I read aloud, looking up at Allison with confusion. "Keep reading," she said, her expression unchanged. I continued down the list, each rule stranger than the last. Rule 5. If you hear knocking on your door after midnight, do not answer regardless of who it sounds like. I flipped the card over. Rule 8. Never interact with Melvin if he appears in the lounge at night. I looked up again. "Who's Melvin?" "Just keep reading," Allison said, her tone leaving no room for discussion. Rule 10. Avoid the supply closet during snowstorms. I shook my head, a smile forming. Rule 12. If you hear cries for help from anywhere in the station between 2 and 3 a.m., do not investigate. Report it in the morning. I laughed, waiting for Allison to crack a smile. "This is some kind of initiation joke, right? Hayes the new guy?" Allison's expression didn't change. "These aren't jokes, Mr. Evans. They're for your safety and the safety of everyone at this station." My smile faded. "You can't be serious." "I am completely serious." Her voice dropped lower. "These rules exist for good reasons. Follow them exactly as written." The intensity in her eyes made me uncomfortable. I looked down at the card again. "But some of these don't make sense. Why would—" "Dinner's at 6, she cut me off. "I suggest you use the time until then to unpack and review those rules thoroughly." She turned to leave, then paused. "The satellite phone in the communications room is for emergencies only. Internet access is limited to research purposes." With that, she walked away, leaving me standing in my doorway with the bizarre list of rules in my hand. I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed, reading through the list again. There were 15 rules total, each one more puzzling than the last. I wondered if this was some kind of psychological experiment, testing how new staff responded to arbitrary instructions. I spent the next few hours unpacking and organizing my quarters, but my mind kept returning to those strange rules. By the time 6 o'clock approached, curiosity had gotten the better of me, and I decided to see what my colleagues might say about them. The mess hall was easy to find, a large room with several tables and a serving area along one wall. 3 people were already seated at a table when I entered. They glanced up as I approached, but quickly returned to their meals. "Hi, I'm Bradley Evans, the new environmental systems engineer," I said, setting my tray down. "Just arrived today." A woman with shoulder-length dark brown hair and rectangular glasses gave me a brief nod. "Dr. Sandra Bowen, lead researcher," she said, without looking up from her food. "Bill Graham, maintenance," grunted a large man with a buzz cut and heavy brows. He continued eating without further acknowledgement. "Everleigh Juarez, communications," said the third person, a petite woman with long black hair in a braid. She offered a quick, nervous smile before returning her attention to her plate. I tried making small talk as I ate, asking about their work and how long they'd been at the station. Their answers were short, almost rehearsed, creating an uncomfortable atmosphere. "So," I said after several minutes of awkward silence, "Allison gave me this interesting list of rules earlier." I pulled the card from my pocket. "Some of them are pretty unusual. Is this some kind of tradition for newcomers?" The reaction was immediate. Bill's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Sandra's shoulders stiffened. Everleigh's eyes darted toward the exit. "The rules are important," Sandra said, her voice clipped. "We all follow them." "But some of them don't make sense," I pressed. "Like not interacting with someone named Melvin in the lounge at night." "Who's Melvin? Is he part of the staff?" Bill abruptly stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Need to check the generators before the storm hits," he muttered, taking his tray to the cleaning station. "You should follow the rules, Mr. Evans," Sandra said, her tone leaving no room for discussion, without exception. Everleigh hadn't spoken, but I noticed her hands trembling slightly as she pushed food around her plate. "I just thought, we all have work to do," Sandra interrupted, standing up. "Orientation continues tomorrow at 8. Don't be late." With that, she left, followed quickly by Everleigh, who avoided eye contact entirely. I finished my meal alone, more confused than ever. Their reactions seemed extreme for what should have been a simple question. Back in my quarters, I reviewed my notes on the environmental systems I'd be working with and tried to push thoughts of the strange rules aside. Outside my small window, darkness had fallen, and I could hear the wind picking up. According to the weather report I'd seen in the mess hall, a storm was moving in overnight. Around 11, I got ready for bed, exhausted from the journey and the day's events. The bed was surprisingly comfortable, and despite my lingering questions about the station and its odd protocols, I fell asleep quickly. I'm not sure how long I slept before a sound woke me, footsteps in the hallway, followed by the creaking of furniture. I blinked at the digital clock on my nightstand, 2:17 a.m. The footsteps had stopped, but I could hear what sounded like someone sitting in the lounge area, which was just down the hall from my room. I lay still, listening. The station's heating system hummed steadily, but underneath that was another sound. Breathing, maybe, or the soft rustling of clothing. Someone was definitely in the lounge. Rule 8 flashed in my mind. Never interact with Melvin if he appears in the lounge at night. It was ridiculous, of course. Probably just another staff member who couldn't sleep. But the way everyone had reacted when I mentioned the rules, especially the one about Melvin, my curiosity won out. I slipped out of bed and moved quietly to my door, opening it just enough to peer down the hallway toward the lounge. The corridor was dimly lit by emergency lighting, casting long shadows along the walls. In the lounge, illuminated by the soft glow of a desk lamp, sat a man I hadn't seen before. He was gaunt, with disheveled hair and hollow cheeks, wearing what looked like a faded jumpsuit. He wasn't doing anything, just sitting in one of the chairs, staring at the wall. Melvin, I presumed. As if sensing my gaze, the man's head began to turn slowly in my direction. I quickly pulled back, closing my door as quietly as possible. My heart pounded in my chest as I leaned against the door, listening for any sound of movement in the hallway. Nothing, just the constant hum of the station's systems. I returned to bed, pulling the covers up despite the comfortable temperature in the room. I told myself that Melvin was probably just another researcher working a different shift, someone I hadn't been introduced to yet. The rules were likely exaggerated safety measures, or perhaps some kind of inside joke I wasn't privy to. But as I lay there trying to fall back asleep, I couldn't shake the image of that gaunt face, those empty eyes, and the strange stillness of his posture. Whatever explanation there was for the rules and for Melvin's presence in the lounge, I had a feeling it wasn't as simple as I wanted to believe. I closed my eyes and tried to think about the work ahead of me: environmental systems, maintenance schedules, efficiency improvements, normal, logical things. But my mind kept returning to the man in the lounge and the list of rules that now seemed less like a joke and more like a warning. I asked Bill about Melvin during our system check the next morning. We were in the generator room, and I figured the low hum of machinery would make for a private conversation. "So, that guy Melvin in the lounge last night," I started. The wrench in Bill's hand clattered to the floor, striking the concrete with a sharp metallic ring. He stared at it for several seconds, his face blank. "I need to check the backup generators," he muttered, not even bothering to pick up the tool. He walked away without looking at me, leaving his wrench on the floor. I stood there, watching his broad shoulders disappear through the doorway. The sudden exit left me with a weird feeling in my stomach. I picked up the wrench and set it on the workbench before finishing the system check myself. Later that day, I tried Dr. Torres in the West Wing lab. She was hunched over a microscope, making notes on a pad beside her. "Excuse me, Dr. Torres? I was wondering about one of the station rules, the one about Melvin in the lounge at night." She looked up from her work, her eyes narrowing slightly behind her glasses. "Melvin left months ago, Mr. Evans. There's no one by that name currently stationed here. But I suggest you focus on your work instead of chasing ghosts." She cut me off, her tone firm. "The environmental systems need calibration, and the director expects your report by tomorrow." She turned back to her microscope, making it clear our conversation was over. I left the lab more confused than when I entered. If Melvin had left months ago, who was sitting in the lounge at night? My final attempt was with Everly during lunch. The mess hall was empty except for us, and she was sitting alone, picking at a plate of reconstituted potatoes. "Hey, Everly," I said, setting my tray across from hers. "Quick question about that rule with Melvin in the lounge. I think I saw someone there last night and—" She stood up so quickly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Without a word or even a glance in my direction, she walked straight out of the mess hall, leaving her half-eaten lunch behind. I sat alone, staring at her abandoned tray. The reactions I was getting made no sense. It was like I'd mentioned some terrible taboo instead of asking a simple question about a station resident. That night, I lay in bed thinking about the strange behavior of my colleagues. None of them had given me a straight answer. Bill had literally dropped what he was doing to get away from me. Dr. Torres claimed Melvin wasn't even at the station, and Everly couldn't even stand to hear his name. I tried to sleep, but my mind kept racing with questions. Who was the man in the lounge? Why was everyone so afraid to talk about him? And why make a rule about not interacting with someone who supposedly wasn't even here? On my third night at the station, I woke again to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. I checked my watch. 2:23 in the morning. The footsteps were heavier than before, more deliberate. Then I heard something new, sobbing, low, mournful crying coming from the direction of the lounge. I sat up in bed, listening. The crying continued, occasionally broken by a gasping breath. It sounded like someone in genuine distress. I knew I should stay in my room. The rules were clear: never interact with Melvin in the lounge at night. But the sobbing, it sounded so human, so full of pain. Against everything my instincts were telling me, I got out of bed and put on my slippers. I unlocked my door and stepped into the hallway, which was lit only by the dim emergency lights along the baseboards. The sobbing grew louder as I approached the lounge. When I reached the doorway, I saw him, Melvin, sitting in the same chair as before, hunched over with his face in his hands. His shoulders shook with each sob. "Are you all right?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The sobbing stopped instantly. Slowly, Melvin lowered his hands and turned toward me. His face looked different than before, gaunt with deep shadows under his eyes. "You shouldn't have spoken to me," he said. His voice wasn't right. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, layered with echoes that didn't match the acoustics of the room. "The rules exist for your protection, not mine." I took a step back, my heart hammering in my chest. As Melvin stood, the desk lamp cast strange shadows across his face. His skin, there was something wrong with it. It looked almost translucent, like thin paper held up to light. Dark lines ran beneath the surface, veins, but too dark, too visible. "Stay away from the supply closet," Melvin said, taking a step toward me. "No matter what you hear, no matter who calls your name." As he spoke, the edges of his form seemed to blur and darken. His outline wavered like smoke in a breeze, and before my eyes he began to dissolve into shadow, pieces of him drifting away like ash from a fire. "What are you?" I managed to ask, my voice breaking. But he was already gone, the last wisps of darkness fading into nothing, leaving only the empty chair and the desk lamp casting its yellow glow across the vacant lounge. I ran back to my room, slamming the door behind me and fumbling with the lock. Once it was secured, I backed away until my legs hit the bed, and I collapsed onto it. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. What I'd seen wasn't possible. People don't dissolve into shadow. They don't have skin you can see through. They don't speak with voices that echo in impossible ways. I pulled my knees to my chest and stared at the locked door. Sleep was out of the question now. I'd spend the rest of the night right here, trying to make sense of what I'd witnessed, trying to understand what Melvin was, because whatever I'd just spoken to in the lounge, it certainly wasn't human. I tried to get more information about what I'd seen in the lounge, but every time I brought up Melvin, my colleagues shut down the conversation. Bill would find an excuse to check something in another room. Dr. Torres insisted no one by that name was currently at the station. Everly couldn't even stand to hear his name. The more they avoided my questions, the more certain I became that something wasn't right at Antarctic Research Station Alpha 7. I kept thinking about the figure I'd seen in the lounge, his translucent skin, those dark veins visible underneath, and the way he'd dissolved into nothing right in front of me. Whatever I'd spoken to wasn't human, but nobody would talk about it. 4 days passed with me going through the motions of my work while trying to make sense of what was happening. I checked environmental systems, ran diagnostics on equipment, and filed reports, all while watching my colleagues for any slip that might give me answers. Then the weather turned. A severe blizzard hit the station with almost no warning. The meteorological sensors had predicted bad weather, but nothing like this. Winds howled against the outer walls at over 70 miles per hour, and visibility dropped to zero outside the reinforced windows. The temperature plummeted to 40 below, and even inside, the heating system struggled to keep up. "Evans, we need to secure the external monitoring equipment," Bill said, appearing at my door. His usual stoic expression had given way to something close to concern. "If we don't get it inside, we'll lose the data and the gear." I grabbed my cold weather gear and followed him to the airlock. We suited up in silence, pulling on thermal layers, boots, gloves, and face protection. The moment we stepped outside, the wind nearly knocked me off my feet. Snow whipped around us in blinding sheets. "Stay close," Bill shouted over the howl of the storm. 10 steps to the monitoring station, then straight back. We fought our way to the equipment array. My fingers grew numb, even through the insulated gloves, as we disconnected sensors and packed them into protective cases. The wind seemed determined to tear them from our hands. After securing the equipment, we staggered back to the airlock, the blizzard pushing against us like a living thing. Once inside, we removed our snow-covered outer layers and carried the equipment cases to the maintenance area. "We need to check the generators," Bill said, rubbing his hands together to restore circulation. "Storm this bad could knock out the main power. Backup systems need to be ready." The generator room hummed with the sound of machinery. Bill moved methodically from one panel to the next, checking readings and making adjustments. I followed his lead, monitoring fuel levels and system outputs. "Everything looks stable," I said after checking the last display. "Main power's holding for now." Bill nodded, but his attention had shifted to the far corner of the room. "Hear that?" At first, I didn't hear anything over the generator noise. Then it came through, a faint sound like someone calling for help. "Is that coming from the supply closet?" I asked, moving toward the door in the back wall. Bill grabbed my arm, his grip tight enough to hurt. "Remember the rules, Evans. Rule 12. Don't investigate cries for help during a storm." The cries grew louder, more desperate. A man's voice, hoarse with fear or pain, calling, "Help, please, is anyone there?" "Someone could be hurt," I said, pulling away from Bill. "It's not what you think," Bill insisted, his face pale. "Just walk away. We all have to follow the rules." But I couldn't ignore it. What if someone was trapped or injured? Rule or no rule, I couldn't just leave them. "I have to check," I said. Bill backed away, shaking his head. "I can't be here for this. I can't watch you." He didn't finish the sentence, just turned and hurried from the generator room, leaving me alone with the increasingly frantic cries. I approached the supply closet door. The voice on the other side grew clearer. "Please help, I know someone's out there, please." I hesitated with my hand on the knob. Rule 12 existed for a reason, but what reason could justify ignoring someone in distress? I took a deep breath and opened the door. Inside was not what I expected. Instead of cleaning supplies and equipment, the closet extended into a narrow corridor lined with shelving. Huddled against the far wall was a middle-aged man in a pristine jumpsuit, nothing like the ghostly figure I'd seen in the lounge. This man looked solid, real, with short brown hair streaked with gray and alert eyes that widened when he saw me. "You opened the door," he said, sounding both surprised and relieved. I wasn't sure anyone would. "Who are you?" I asked, staying in the doorway. "Melvin Prescott. I've been hiding in the abandoned sections of the station for months." His voice was normal, not the layered, echoing sound I'd heard from the figure in the lounge. "You're new here, aren't you? The engineer they brought in to replace Chen?" I nodded, trying to reconcile this very human Melvin with the otherworldly thing I'd encountered before. "I saw something, in the lounge a few nights ago. It said it was Melvin." The man's face hardened. "That wasn't me. That was something else wearing my appearance." He glanced past me toward the generator room door. "We can't talk here. They'll be looking for you soon. Bill will have told them you went to the closet." "Told who? What's going on here?" Melvin stood up, moving with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to stay quiet. "I'll explain everything, but not here. We need to move now." He reached past me to a section of wall that looked identical to the rest of the corridor. His fingers found a seam I hadn't noticed and pulled, revealing a hidden maintenance panel. Behind it was a dark passage. "This way," he said. "The old station sections. They don't monitor them anymore." I hesitated. Following a stranger into a hidden part of the station seemed like a bad idea, but so did ignoring the obvious cover-up happening around me. And if this was the real Melvin, I needed to know what the thing in the lounge had been. Quickly, Melvin urged, before they come looking. I ducked into the passage after him. The panel closed behind us, leaving us in darkness until Melvin switched on a small LED light. The beam revealed a narrow maintenance tunnel that smelled of dust and old metal. "Watch your step," Melvin whispered, leading the way. "Some of the floor panels are loose." We moved through the tunnel, which gradually widened into what looked like an older version of the station's main corridor. The walls here were a different color, the design more utilitarian. Melvin led me to a room that might once have been living quarters but now contained makeshift shelving filled with supplies and papers. "My home for the past 7 months," he said, gesturing around the space. A sleeping bag lay in one corner. A small camp stove sat on a metal table alongside carefully rationed food supplies. What caught my attention most, however, were the walls, covered in papers, photographs, and handwritten notes connected by strings like something from a detective movie. "What is all this?" I asked, moving closer to examine the display. "The truth about Antarctic Research Station Alpha 7, Melvin said. He pulled a journal from beneath his sleeping bag and handed it to me. "Start with this. It's Dr. Winter's research log from 2 years ago, before everything went wrong." I opened the journal. The first entries were standard research notes about atmospheric sampling and ice core analysis. But as I flipped through the pages, the tone changed. The handwriting became more erratic, with passages about anomalous readings and unexplained phenomena. "Dr. Winters was the lead researcher before Dr. Torres," Melvin explained, pulling more documents from his collection. "His team discovered something in the ice, something that had been trapped there for thousands of years." He spread photographs across the table, images of ice core samples with strange, dark patterns running through them, equipment readings with impossible values, and a final photo of the research team standing around what looked like a black, crystalline object embedded in ice. "They thought they'd made a scientific breakthrough," Melvin continued. "Instead, they made contact with something that shouldn't exist in our reality." He handed me another journal, this one labeled with his own name. "I was the communications specialist back then. I recorded everything that happened after they brought that thing into the station." I skimmed through Melvin's journal, my skin growing cold as I read accounts of researchers experiencing hallucinations, hearing voices, and seeing people who couldn't possibly be there. "What is this thing?" I asked, looking up from the journal. "We never knew exactly," Melvin said, "but from what we could piece together, it's an entity that feeds on human consciousness. It takes the form of people who have died at the station, using their appearances to interact with the living." A chill ran through me as I remembered the figure in the lounge, how it had dissolved into shadow. "The rules," I said. "They're not safety protocols, they're containment measures." Melvin nodded. "Each rule exists to limit the entity's ability to feed or spread. It's strongest between 2 and 3 in the morning. It can mimic voices to lure people to certain areas during storms. It can knock on doors after midnight." He pointed to the supply closet on a station map pinned to the wall. "And that closet is one of its anchor points, places where the barrier between our reality and whatever realm it exists in is thinnest. So the staff, Allison, Dr. Torres, Bill, Everly, they're not researchers," I said, the truth dawning on me. "They're containment specialists," Melvin confirmed. "Their job is to maintain the rules and keep the entity confined to the station. They couldn't tell you the truth because awareness makes you more vulnerable to its influence. It feeds on fear and understanding." I thought about how they'd reacted whenever I mentioned Melvin's name. The avoidance, the denial, the fear. "They think you're dead, don't they? Or worse, they think you've become part of it." Melvin's expression darkened. "When the entity first manifested, it took the form of Dr. Winters, who had died in what everyone thought was an accident. By the time we realized what was happening, 3 more researchers were dead. I was supposed to be next, but I managed to escape into these old sections of the station. As far as the containment team knows, I'm either dead or compromised. I sat on a crate, trying to process everything. So, what I saw in the lounge was the entity using my appearance, Melvin finished. It's been doing that for months, waiting for someone to break the rules so it can feed. He looked at me with sympathy. And you spoke to it, which is why I had to reach out to you. You're in danger now. The implications hit me all at once. The isolation of the station, the strange rules, my colleagues' behavior, and now the revelation that some kind of consciousness-feeding entity was loose in the facility. What do we do? I asked. For now, we stay hidden, Melvin said, gathering his journals and documents. I've been studying this thing for months, looking for weaknesses, ways to fight it, and I've been planning something else too. He looked at me with determination in his eyes, a way to get us both out of here alive. I sat across from Melvin in his makeshift living space, my head spinning as I tried to process what he'd just told me. The station staff weren't Antarctic researchers at all. They were containment specialists, people trained to keep whatever was in that station from getting out. So, the rules, I said, looking at the papers spread across the floor between us. They're not safety protocols, Melvin said, his voice low and steady. They're containment measures. Each one exists because someone discovered, usually the hard way, that breaking it gives the entity more power. I ran my hand through my hair, feeling the weight of this revelation, and no one told me because awareness makes you more vulnerable, Melvin said, gathering some of his notes. The less you know about what you're containing, the less it can use against you. The moment you recognize it as something more than a strange rule or odd occurrence, it can start to work on your mind. The next few days blurred together as I hid with Melvin in the abandoned sections of the station. He'd created a network of safe passages through maintenance tunnels and decommissioned corridors, places the entity couldn't easily reach. We moved carefully, always listening for footsteps or voices that might indicate the staff were searching for us. Each day, Melvin taught me how to survive. We sat on the floor of his hideout as he explained the patterns he'd documented over months of observation. It's strongest between 2 and 3 in the morning, he said, pointing to a chart he'd made tracking incidents. That's when it has enough energy to fully manifest in physical form. Like when I saw you, not you, in the lounge, I said. Melvin nodded. It's testing boundaries, seeing if it can break through the containment measures. The lounge is one weak point, the supply closet is another. An anchor point, I repeated, remembering what he'd told me earlier. Yes, during storms, the electromagnetic disturbance weakens the barriers between, whatever realm it exists in and ours. That's why it can call for help through the closet during blizzards. I thought about Bill's reaction when we heard those cries. He knew exactly what was happening. What about the knocking after midnight? I asked. That's when it's trying to get you to invite it in, Melvin said, his eyes darkening. Never answer a door at night here, Bradley, no matter who you think is knocking. At night, we took turns keeping watch. Melvin had rigged a small viewing port that allowed us to observe part of the main corridor without being seen. Around 2:15 each morning, like clockwork, I watched the entity appear. The first night I saw it, after knowing the truth, was the hardest. It walked down the hallway with Melvin's face, Melvin's gait, a perfect copy right down to the nervous way the real Melvin sometimes rubbed his thumb against his fingers when thinking. The entity paused near my old quarters, tilting its head as if listening, then continued to the lounge where it took its usual position under the desk lamp. It's waiting for someone to break the rules, Melvin whispered beside me as we watched. When they do, it feeds. On what? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Consciousness, awareness, the essence of what makes us human. I pulled back from the viewing port, feeling sick, and the staff just contain it? Why not destroy it? Melvin's laugh was bitter. They've tried, but you can't destroy something that isn't fully here. The best they can do is keep it from spreading. 2 weeks passed this way. I lost track of days, marking time only by the entity's nightly appearances and our careful monitoring of staff movements. We survived on supplies Melvin had stockpiled: protein bars, dried food, and water he collected from maintenance pipes. He'd been living this way for months, staying alive while everyone thought he was either dead or compromised. One morning, after checking that the corridors were clear, Melvin returned to our hiding spot with a look of determination I hadn't seen before. "I've been working on something," he said, unfolding a crude map of the station and surrounding area. "The next supply helicopter is scheduled to arrive in 3 days. There's going to be a brief weather window. They'll have to move fast to unload and reload." I leaned forward, studying the map. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we're getting out of here," Melvin said, pointing to a route he'd marked in red pen. "I've spent months preparing for this. We can board the helicopter while they're busy with the supply transfer." "They'll see us," I said, but Melvin was already shaking his head. "Not if we time it right. I've watched every supply delivery for the past 6 months. There's a pattern to how they work, a 3-minute window when no one watches the cargo area." He pulled out a worn folder from beneath his sleeping bag and opened it. Inside were photographs, journal entries, and what looked like official documents. "This is everything I've gathered about what they found in the ice and what happened afterward. Names, dates, incident reports I managed to copy before they locked everything down." He tapped the folder. "Enough evidence to expose the entire containment operation." "To who?" I asked. "I have contacts on the Scientific Oversight Committee, people who don't know what's really happening here. Once we reach the mainland research facility in New Zealand, we can get this information to them." I looked at the folder, then at the man who had risked everything to document the truth. "Why are you doing this? Why not just escape on your own?" Melvin was quiet for a moment. "Because 3 of my friends died before I understood what was happening. Because what they found in the ice shouldn't be contained, it should be destroyed. And because no one else should be sent here without knowing what they're really dealing with." I nodded slowly, understanding. "So we have 3 days to prepare." 3 days, Melvin confirmed, rolling up his map. "And then we're getting the hell out of Antarctica." I spotted our chance as the helicopter descended through the brief break in the weather. The pilot struggled to keep the aircraft steady as Antarctic winds buffeted it from all sides. Melvin and I crouched behind a stack of empty supply crates, waiting for the moment we'd rehearsed over the past 3 days. "Remember, we have 3 minutes at most," Melvin whispered, clutching his evidence folder against his chest. His knuckles were white from the grip, and I noticed his thumb rubbing nervously against the folder's edge. I nodded, my heart pounding so hard I felt it in my throat. The cold bit through my layers despite the thermal gear we'd taken from the abandoned storage areas. We'd spent the morning working our way through maintenance tunnels to reach this external supply area without being seen. The helicopter touched down about 50 yards away, its rotors whipping snow into mini cyclones. 2 crew members jumped out and began unloading large containers. Bill and Allison emerged from the station's main entrance to meet them. I watched the precise choreography unfold exactly as Melvin had predicted. The crew set down the first wave of supplies, then headed back to the helicopter for more while Bill and Allison began checking inventory on what had arrived. "Now," Melvin said, tapping my shoulder. We moved quickly but carefully across the exposed area, keeping the stacked containers between us and the staff. The snow crunched under our boots, but the sound was lost in the helicopter's roar. My lungs burned with each frozen breath as we reached the cargo area. The side door of the helicopter stood open. We climbed in, squeezing ourselves between containers marked for the return trip. I pulled a tarp over us just as footsteps approached. "Last 2 containers ready for loading," a voice called out. I held my breath as someone climbed into the cargo area. Boots stepped inches from my face. A container slid into place beside us, then another. The tarp shifted slightly as someone adjusted the load, and I felt Melvin tense beside me. The boots walked away, Doors slammed shut. The engines roared louder. "Clear for takeoff," crackled a voice over the radio. The helicopter lurched, and I felt the sensation of lifting. My stomach dropped as we rose into the air. I risked pulling the tarp back just enough to see out a small window. Antarctic Research Station Alpha 7 grew smaller below us, its cluster of buildings shrinking until they were just a collection of dark specks against the endless white. The relief hit me so hard I almost gasped aloud. We'd made it. We were actually leaving. Melvin kept his eyes closed, his breathing controlled but rapid. His hand found mine in the darkness and squeezed once, a silent acknowledgement of our success. The flight to the mainland research facility in New Zealand took several hours with a refueling stop. We remained hidden the entire time, afraid to reveal ourselves until we reached Melvin's contacts. The cramped space made my legs cramp, and the cold seeped through the metal floor of the cargo area. But compared to what we'd left behind, this discomfort felt almost welcome. When we finally landed in New Zealand, Melvin led me quickly from the helicopter during the unloading confusion. The warm air hit me like a physical force after weeks in Antarctic cold. We slipped past busy dock workers and made our way to a nondescript office building at the edge of the research complex. Melvin knocked on a door marked Dr. Eleanor Chen, Scientific Oversight Committee. A middle-aged woman with sharp eyes opened the door, looked at Melvin, and her face went pale. "Prescott, they reported you dead 3 months ago." "Not dead," Melvin said, his voice hoarse. "Just hiding. We need to talk, Eleanor. It's worse than anyone thought." She ushered us inside quickly, locking the door behind us. The next 12 hours blurred together. I gave my testimony to a panel of 5 scientists who recorded every word. I described finding Melvin, the entity in the lounge, the rules that made no sense until you knew what they contained. I explained the disappearances, the strange behaviors of the staff, everything I'd seen and experienced. Melvin presented his evidence folder, laying out photographs, journal entries, and official documents. The committee members passed them around, faces growing grimmer with each new piece. "This will need to be classified," one of them finally said, a gray-haired man with thick glasses. "The implications are significant." "People deserve to know," Melvin argued. "Some people will know," Dr. Chen said carefully, "but a full public disclosure, that would create panic without purpose." I wasn't surprised. Even as I testified, I suspected the complete truth would stay classified, buried under security protocols and scientific jargon. The committee arranged temporary housing for us, debriefed us separately over several days, then advised us to reintegrate into civilian life while they handled the situation. Months passed. I found work at a conventional engineering firm in Auckland, designing climate control systems for office buildings. The irony wasn't lost on me, still managing air circulation and temperature regulation, but for normal people in normal buildings, where the only thing lurking in supply closets was cleaning equipment. My apartment overlooked the harbor. It was small but bright, with windows I kept open even on cool days. I couldn't stand enclosed spaces anymore. I never found out what happened to the containment staff, Allison, Bill, Dr. Torres, and Everly. The committee wouldn't tell me if they'd been extracted or if they remained at the station. I didn't know if the entity was still confined or if more drastic measures had been taken. Melvin and I kept in touch for a while, meeting for coffee every few weeks. He seemed to adjust better than I did, finding purpose in consulting work with the Oversight Committee. But 6 months after our escape, he took a research position in Europe, and our contact became less frequent, then stopped altogether. The memories faded around the edges but never disappeared. I still woke sometimes at exactly 2:17 in the morning, heart racing, certain I'd heard footsteps in the hallway outside my bedroom. I installed extra locks on my doors and never answered knocking after dark. Winter in Auckland brought storms that rattled my windows and howled through the city streets. During the worst of them, I sometimes heard echoes of that unearthly sobbing from the station lounge. Logically, I knew it was just wind through the building's ventilation system or rain against the glass, but logic offered little comfort at 3 in the morning. On those nights, I remembered Melvin's hollow eyes as he warned me about the consequences of breaking rules designed to protect the living from forces beyond human comprehension. I remembered the entity dissolving into shadow, its edges blurring like smoke. I remembered the way it had looked at me with perfect recognition, wearing Melvin's face but empty of anything human. I kept my own set of rules now. Never stay in one place too long. Always have at least 2 exits visible. Never look too closely at reflective surfaces during the darkest hours of night. Simple precautions that help me sleep. My colleagues thought I was just eccentric. My few friends assumed I had some trauma in my past. Not incorrect, though they imagined more conventional horrors. No one knew the full story except Melvin and those 5 people on the committee. Sometimes I wondered if I'd imagined it all, if the isolation and extreme conditions of Antarctica had simply broken something in my mind. But then I'd catch a glimpse of something impossible in a shadowed corner or hear a voice call my name when no one was there, and I knew. Some rules exist for a reason. Some doors should remain closed. Some knowledge comes at a price too steep to measure.